No, that's really nicely put. So, like, I want to transition into the current situation and what we can learn from that whole moment and the lasting impacts of Irvine 11 stand. In recent years, we've seen an escalation of tactics used to silence student activism, and that's expanded outside of the campus as well, like the criminalization of protests, bans on SJP chapters, MSA chapters, surveillance. How do you see the current climate for student activists, particularly those organizing around Palestine and Muslim students?
I see that there is a powerful movement for Palestinian liberation gaining momentum, not just throughout the world, but specifically within the United States. And the United States is the main means through which Israel can continue its oppressive policies against Palestinians. Without U.S. support, Israeli apartheid would fall over and wither away and blow into the wind like tumbleweed. And so I see this desperate attempt, since they cannot persuade people in a nation that claims to stand for democracy, liberty, justice, and freedom to forfeit their ideals, that since they
Yeah.
cannot convince people through the power of persuasion to support genocide and abandon people experiencing genocide, what they're trying
Mhm.
to do is coerce people and use fear as a silencing tactic, and it is not working. People are more vocal now than they have ever been. Now, I do stress that we can be strategic and intelligent about the way that we are vocal and expressive about our opposition towards Israeli apartheid and genocide. And so I do see a very vicious crackdown. And it's funny because as horrible as the events that have happened with Mahmoud al-Khalil and so many other activists and students who are being threatened with deportation, I also recognize that this heavy-handed approach is what other administrations would have done more clandestinely. Trump is doing openly, loudly, and clumsily, to the point that he is stoking the indignation of our entire country with his blatant and brazen violation of the right to freedom of speech, one of our most sacred values as a nation, as a society. The United States is a racist settler colonial society, but at least its people and residents hold these values to be dear, wherever you are on the political spectrum. And Trump
Yeah.
is basically saying, I don't care about your American values. I care about pleasing and making sure that this genocide keeps going and that our Israeli counterparts are happy with me.
And I think another parallel from the Irvine 11 experience was not just the media response and those things, the use of the exception becoming the rule, using an obscure law to prosecute someone or target pro-Palestinian organizers or activists or people who raised their voice against Israeli genocide, right? And how has that played out? We see these like exceptions becoming the rule of the state and the administrations.
Well, yeah, it's a disturbing phenomena that's like gaining more and more prevalence. But one thing I do want to mention is it's ironic, but as hard as they come down on us, the more they amplify our voice. I remember my accusation of you, sir, an accomplice to genocide echoing throughout different news stations. My voice would have ended in that auditorium had it not been for the DA's stupid and miscalculated attempt to, sometimes they I think they forget the type of
Yeah,
brutality that they're trying to enforce in the occupied territories. They try to bring that over here and try to
yeah,
silence people with fear and intimidation. And so in a way, it amplified our voice millions of times over and helped propel and made visible this double standard that exists on Palestine and towards communities of color, and propelled our movement that much further into the future and into
mhm.
success. And similarly, that's what these heavy-handed tactics are also doing. So as
Yeah,
horrible as they are
absolutely.
towards the individuals, they are also basically with every attempt to extinguish our fire, our flame of resistance, you are causing it to smolder and burn ever brighter. Any attempt to blow out this flame is just going, you're just fanning it. You're making it
Yeah.
bigger. Yeah. But that is just one thing I wanted to mention. I hope,
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
that's an excellent answer. I also want to discuss like websites like Canary Mission, right, where you're a popular figure on. Uh, and have been used to target and dox activists. This has been a really disturbing trend for not just student activists, but people outside of school. People have lost their jobs and these things. Obviously, the courage of many organizers and people who have been vocal about their support for Palestine against the genocide is there, but a little bit about the role of these sites in the broader strategy to suppress activism and how it has affected other activists.
Yes, and so it never surprises me that the most cowardly and evil and pathetic tactics are often deployed in defense of these grave injustices.
Yeah.
And, I just feel that there's a certain level of like racial entitlement, this contempt for us that kind of like takes you back to like plantation slave owners. Like I can't imagine this level of white and racist entitlement that you feel that like, oh, well, if these brown people are going to get out of hand, we're going to destroy their whole lives. It's incredible. And
Yeah, and what was done with Black Panther activists in the 60s or the McCarthy era, where they would brand you and they would try to like silence your voice through these sort of techniques.
Exactly. And I take it also as a badge of honor that these pathetic and vile forces recognize me as so much of a threat. But I will say it is also violating. I'm not going to glamorize it and say that it is bad. And there are people who have lost their jobs, unfortunately. And I
Yeah,
hope that this movement will achieve victory soon in the coming years, in the sense that we will reverse this position. One of my favorite quotes about this topic is, "I wish to humiliate all those that would make us slaves." There are
yeah,
people out there that are attempting so desperately to hurt us for speaking truth and justice that I cannot wait for the day that our roles reverse. And another thing that we can do as a community is be on the offensive. There are people out there who don't want to be recognized for their support for Israeli genocide, but
yeah,
do support Israeli genocide, and they are very cowardly in nature. So that when you show a little bit of light on who they are and how they're supporting these things, I think we also need to put a magnifying glass on those folks as well and start identifying people who are supporting crimes against humanity and encouraging the doxing of students, encouraging deportations, collaborating with racist policies, and basically doing harm to vulnerable communities. I think these people need to be exposed, and I think we need to be a little bit on the offensive in recognizing these people. But I also want to wish for my comrades, my brothers, my sisters, my friends and allies, accomplices, I wish you all the perseverance and strength during these difficult times in which
yeah,
speaking truth to power is criminalized and penalized and
yeah.
and punishable in this society.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to have like open discussions about these sort of tactics that are taking place. And I think another thing I wrote about last year was about the redefinition or reinterpretation of the anti-Semitism to silence criticism against Israel, and even the banning of some pro-Palestinian slogans like "from the river to the sea" on various campuses. And how do you see these developments? And can you give some insight about what impact they have on freedom of speech and this effort to criminalize Palestinian grief and Palestinian solidarity with Palestinians, the Palestinian cause?
Yeah, it reminds me of a very brief anecdote where the leader and founder of the PFLP, one of the main liberation organizations for Palestine, Jabhat Sha'biya, the Palestinian Communist Party, how he and his family were forced on a death march. And when his sister died on that death march, they were forced into an area where they were under curfew, and he was not even allowed the dignity of burying his sister. So he had to wait until the dead of night to create a grave with his, dig up a grave with his bare hands till his fingernails
Yeah,
bled. And how there's a long history of silencing Palestinian grief, mourning. Yes. So there's this sort of like, again, mental gymnastics in which the voice of racism, white supremacy, Zionism, whatever it is, has appropriated the language of resistance and assumed victimhood at our hands. And so it's funny, we live in interesting times in which hypothetical or theoretical violence against a particular white community is somehow seen as more important than actual and ongoing violence, like actual death counts, actual corpses, actual body counts, actual severed limbs of our community, and how it's sort of establishing a hierarchy of value of life in which Palestinian lives are never valuable and of never any worthy of any defense at all. And that somehow Israeli lives are always infinitely more valuable and always need to take precedent and priority. And how the selective even interpretation of Semitism, that I am a Semite by definition. If you read the works of evil and disgusting anti-Semites, who I liken and imagine to be in league with Zionists, having both supremacist ideologies. I am the Semitic definition, bro. I'm so Semitic it hurts. But basically there's this sort of rebranding of that. If you challenge racism, you're the real racist. If you question apartheid, you're the actual racist. If you challenge genocide, you're the racist because you hurt the racist's feelings. And it's this really whiny and pathetic discourse that's really grotesque. But I will say,
And
if you want to see how anti-Semitic, most of our comrades, half of our comrades, are Jewish brothers and sisters. There are people who are risking their role in their own communities, exile from their own communities, because they feel it at the defense of Palestinian lives as an accurate expression of Jewish morals. And when those people are met with police violence, that is institutional anti-Semitism. So it's ironic and very interesting times that we live in, that while actual police violence is met upon Jewish lives and non-Jewish lives in defense of Palestinian life, that the focus on anti-Semitism is restricted to, as you said, from the river to the sea. Slogans and symbols of beautiful resistance have been rendered profane.
yeah. And yeah, I think that's very well said. With this increasing criminalization of Palestinian solidarity and student activism, what strategies do you think are necessary for not just organizers, but people uh, to, people in solidarity with the movement to navigate these challenges? And how can different communities, whether it's Muslim, Palestinian, Black, Latinx, and others, build stronger coalitions and work together to resist growing crackdown?
I think that this is now a time for further solidarity, that now is the time, if you've ever been afraid to speak out, now is the time to do so. You cannot, as Howard Zinn said it, you cannot stay neutral on a moving train. And the more of us speak out, the harder it is to enforce these policies on all of us. So you will make it logistically impossible to enforce a crackdown. So the other thing is, I do want to mention, like the way Malcolm X has said it, we do not need, our community is sufficient enough for our own liberation. We don't need outside support. However, it does help. And so for our white allies out there, our Jewish allies, now is the time to also use that white privilege to defend your Palestinian brothers and sisters. Put your voices and your names, and not necessarily your names, but your voices and yourselves on the line. Help us. Be out there. Be vocal. And I think that it's funny, the more our Jewish and white counterparts speak up, the more everyone has contributed to this hollowing of this false accusation and weaponization of anti-Semitism. Eventually, it won't have any meaning left, which is sad, because there is genuine anti-Semitism, and I see it as part and parcel of Zionism's and other supremacist ideologies. But at least the Zionist argument of weaponizing anti-Semitism to defend its racist practices, I see as eventually being nullified by our collective activism. So resist, continue to resist, and persevere. Understand that movements like this don't win overnight, but that victory is coming, and it's very close by.
Yeah, and I think there's also a recognition of, amongst different movements, that this is a shared struggle, because once you target one community under this basis, then it can expand into other communities, right, as well, right? So there is a need to build stronger coalitions, and I think there have been strong coalitions compared to like when we were in school. Like, I think there's a greater solidarity amongst different communities. And, like in DC, the protests had so many different groups in it, and it shows that on the ground, like, there is a critical mass that still exists. What are your thoughts on that?
That our movement is growing, and
Yeah.
that absolutely, that if you can criminalize, I think genocide is one of the most vile crimes in all of human imagination and all of human capacity. One of the things that basically, bring into question whether, I think ultimately the answer is that our existence as a species is vindicated. But genocide is one of those things that calls the value of our
Yeah.
species into question. What I would say
That's
is
very well
that,
put.
thank you, if that can be criminalized, if something
Yeah.
as noble as speaking out against the most evil expressions in all of human capacity, then virtually any act of good, any act of decency, any expression of
Yeah.
kindness or compassion can be criminalized and penalized. And so we have to understand that this doesn't just threaten Palestinians or Arabs, it threatens every single resident of the United States. And that if we want to exist in a society that is free, where not only justice and freedom are just politically allowable or non-punishable crimes, But where they prevail, then we have to oppose this evil and injustice of stigmatizing and penalizing and criminalizing dissent in favor of Palestinian liberation.
Looking at the legacy of the Irvine 11 case in today's political climate, how do you think student activism has evolved, and what lessons can today's activists take from that moment? And what's at stake for the future of not just student mobilization, but just broader solidarity movements?
Palestine is also in addition to an actual physical place, it's also a symbol of a place where many people who are, it's the most recent battleground for the age-old conflict between the colonizer and the colonized, between the oppressed and the oppressor. And many people and groups identify with Palestinians and their struggles.
Yes.
We suffer similar wounds, and so their solidarity is our organic brotherhood and sisterhood and community. And so we've adapted, we've grown, we've witnessed the injustices. We're dynamic. We're evolving to anticipate the violences that the institutions have hurled at us in the past. So students are aware that they could be doxxed. And so sometimes they practice some sort of level of anonymity with masks. Students are aware that their universities could come after them. So they organize outside of their student organizations, and that the university can discriminate against them. Yeah. So I feel like we've adapted to anticipating greater and greater discrimination, and that this will likely be the course until victory. Yeah. And I think that, but I want people to know that this movement is growing, and justice in Palestine is inevitable. It's just a matter of how and when and whether we will have the honor of contributing to it. So yeah, man. So that's my 2 cents on that.